Let's turn our attention now to the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Joining me tonight are The Guardian's chief political correspondent, Jessica Elgot, and the writer and journalist, Benedict Spence. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Eye shows Her Majesty's coffin being driven into Buckingham Palace. Their headline, "The Queen returns home." Similarly, the Express says, "Home for one last time." Likewise, the Mail, "Home to her family." Here's the Sun, "Welcome home, ma'am." The Telegraph calls the evening's events the final homecoming. The Mirror references the mobile phone torches held aloft by mourners, describing the Queen as led home by the lights of love. "A last night at the palace," reads the front of the Times. The Metro hears that the new Prince of Wales and his brother, the Duke of Sussex, will walk together in the procession from the palace to Westminster Hall, where the Queen will lie in state. Away from royal matters, the Financial Times reports that government officials have warned companies that it will take longer for them to see the benefits of the £150 billion energy support package than it will for members of the public. And The Guardian understands that restrictions around the sale and promotion of junk food could be scrapped now Liz Truss is Prime Minister. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So, welcome once again to Jessica Elgot and Benedict Spence. Thank you both for coming in. Let's start off with the Express and their front page, "Welcome home for one last time." Jessica.
Yeah, and it felt like a lot of what we've seen has been, the great sort of public mourning, and this feels like there's a slightly different tone to everything tonight before the great kind of ceremony of her lying in state, gets started over the next few days. This is a private moment for her with the family. There's 22 members of the family. The first time they'll all be together in that room to speak privately, to say their own things, and their own memories. And I think that you can see how gruelling it's been, as well. People in grief over the past few days. So many public ceremonies, and I personally hope, on a human level, they get a chance for, time to take a breath tonight.
Yes, and Benedict, they've hardly had time to grieve because it's been so public for them.
Yes, I mean, it's been very dignified, but almost sort of frenetic, the fact that it has been sort of up and down the length of the country. And I mean, obviously central London was very busy today. It's raining. There's a lot of people packed in, obviously, as you can imagine. And yet, at the same time, somehow there was a certain stillness at the end of it. When the procession sort of made its way into Buckingham Palace, there does seem to be a sort of a feeling of calm before it all sort of gears up again for the next stage of the proceedings. And I think that we often talk about wanting to reflect on at times like this, what is there to reflect on. I do think that this is just the moment where the family can have that sort of intake of breath for themselves, just between themselves. And I think that obviously that's going to be very important for them, because it has already been pretty difficult up to now, and I can't imagine it's going to get a lot easier over the next week or so.
Yes, and our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills was reflecting that tonight is that private moment for the family before tomorrow, symbolically, they hand her over to the public and they're allowed to pay their respects.
Yeah, and of course there are so many people who kind of share in a kind of public grief of for what's happened, for what the monarch meant to them, for the symbolism she had in their lives. But for the people who are behind those doors over there, she had she was a mother, a grandmother, a great grandmother, and they will want to have those, to reminisce between themselves about those very personal, private memories that they have of her.
Let's take a look at The Mirror and their headline, "Led Home by Light." We can just get that up. And that's in reference to the mobile phones that people are holding up, the modern day candle, if you like, which is quite useful because it's raining and candles would have been no use whatsoever.
It's quite nice in a way, though, isn't it? Because everybody always says these days people spend too much time on their phone that they don't recognise what's going on around them. Well, here we have a use, actually, that was, I think, quite touching. It's strange. Who would have thought, actually, that the iPhone could play quite a touching role in such a sort of seismic event. But there you are.
It is a beautiful picture, isn't it, Jessica?
It is. I'm not sure whether it was a spontaneous thing. Was it something that just caught on in the crowd? I don't know whether you saw whether it was, but I think it's. I mean, it makes the pictures, look absolutely beautiful. And I think, as well, there's been quite a lot of criticism, I think, of people obviously wanting to watch things through their cameras, and I sometimes think that's a bit unjustified. I think that people like to feel like that at a moment in history. There's many people who will never experience the sort of changeover of a monarch, and I think as well as people obviously sharing in grief, there's a sense of wanting to be here to witness history, and I understand, why people might want to capture that moment.
Benedict, have you thought at any point that it's been in bad taste when people have sort of brought out their mobile phones trying to capture?
Everybody does things in different ways. I mean, I was here on the evening that after Her Majesty passed away, and it was a very mixed. I think there were a lot of people who didn't quite know how to behave. There were a lot of people just being very quiet. Some people decided to play music. Some people took selfies of themselves looking sad. I don't know if that's in good taste or if it's trying to, sort of project something, if it's trying to send a message. I do think, actually, I think you're right. Everybody does it in their own different way. But because it's been so long, actually, since we've been in this sort of situation, I think it is one of those things where people genuinely, in that immediacy, don't actually know what is the correct thing to do. And if you've not been brought up in a culture where you're very somber, as today we are not really quite so somber as we used to be at the time of the passing of the last monarch, I think it can be quite difficult to get the tone right. But broadly speaking, actually, I think people have done it pretty well. I wouldn't say that there's been anything particularly distasteful that's gone on, apart from the odd protest here or there, which of course people are perfectly entitled to do.
What have you made of the protest, Jessica?
Of the protest. I mean, I think that there has to be a really careful balance struck, because people, have their absolute right to express those opinions. Republicanism is a perfectly legitimate point of view that people should be able to express. You would hope that people are able to do that in a way that is not deeply disrespectful to a grieving family, but I think that there are, I think personally there's been some of the policing of it has seemed, on the face of it, to be over the top and counterproductive, frankly, because the last thing you want, if you want to establish legitimacy, and as Charles, has done, pretty well over the course of this last week, there's the polling shows that he, his popularity is pretty good amongst the public in the way that he's, kind of conducted himself over the past week. Then the last thing you want to be seen as doing is kind of crushing dissent, and which will only spark more, people to try and make their views known. And I think it's deeply counterproductive to try and squash those views or those opinions.
Benedict, do you think that the management of those who've wanted to protest has been heavy-handed? We saw the shots of that gentleman dragged out of the crowds in Scotland.
I think that there have been a few examples where, perhaps that's down as much as anything to the individual police officer deciding how to respond in a certain situation. As I say, I was here the evening after it happened, and there were lots of people behaving in different ways, and actually I thought the police were rather restrained in how they handled it, because they had all comers, and you can't necessarily apply blanket rules to a situation like that. I do think it's, somebody should have the ability to mourn their own mother without being harassed. I do think that there is a line there to be drawn. But, I don't really see that there's anything wrong with holding a placard, say, and just making your feelings heard. So, often it does come down to, I think, the judgment of individual officers, and actually it's been a handful of cases. It's not like there have been mass demonstrations that have been cracked on down by the police. So, I think it would be wrong to say that it started in a sort of a spirit of repression. I think it's actually been a rather British way of going about it and saying, well, hang on, you shouldn't be behaving like that in some circumstances. And other police officers going, they're just expressing their views. They're not actually harming anybody. Let's just let it slide.
Let's take a look at the Telegraph now. Their headline, Final Homecoming, and that's been the sentiment throughout, that this is the final journey now. It has been described as such, but technically this literally is the final journey. And
obviously Buckingham Palace is the home that so many people associate with the Queen, or visitors visitors to London. That's the one where they, where children are told the Queen lives. When I brought my little boy into town, then that's the place that you point at, and of course she always considered and as far as I understand it, she always really considered Windsor to be like her proper family home. She had a great, soft spot.
Palace was the office.
Yeah, the office.
It?
Yeah, and that kind of that real soft spot in our heart for Balmoral and for Sandringham. But it feels like this is the home that everyone associates with her, and you'll have that. There's always the story you tell children that if the flag's flying, then it means the Queen's in, and it's flying tonight.
And certainly coming in this evening, still people coming along to Buckingham Palace tonight. Public transport was packed. The rain hasn't put anyone off at all.
I don't think rain is going to put British people off coming to London for anything, let alone the Queen. I think that. But again, coming home to Buckingham Palace, as you say, it wasn't really her home in that sort of sense. And again, I think that there's a certain poignancy there. It's a gilded cage in a lot of ways, and this is the final moments of the monarch will be with her family, but she is for the nation, she's not just for the family. And there is always going to be that sense of, no matter how much we talk about how privileged the royal family is, and of course it is staggeringly privileged, there is that sort of sense of, you'll never just be a private citizen. You'll never just have those private moments. And when you do get them, they will be fleeting, because even in death, you'll be taken away again for everybody else, for the nation, actually, to use as a rallying point as much as anything else. And I think that that's worth pondering upon.
Jessica, can you imagine how they're feeling behind us, this last private time with their mother, grandmother, as you say, a family member, not just the Queen?
Yeah, and I'm sure that what it will be is a time for, a family that doesn't often get to be in the same room together, that often, especially when you get large extended families, which the Queen had, together to reminisce privately about times that, we've never, private jokes we've never heard, or memories from childhood that sort of never made it into newspaper pages or into cameras. And that's a lovely moment. I mean, I'm sure that there'll be a certain amount of anxiety, a certain amount of nerves about the kind of public, the public duties that have got to be performed over the next few days, walking in procession, the funeral itself, and that some of that will be very nerve-wracking. I mean, the descriptions of particularly what Prince William and Harry will have to do over the next few days. I mean, the fact that they're walking in procession behind a coffin, is really very evocative for those of us who watched their mother's funeral and they walked, the way they walked as boys. And so I'm sure that there'll be things that they'll be thinking about and that it'll evoke in us watching it.
The Times, their headline last night at the Palace sums it up.
And I just want to touch on that point again, actually, the fact that they're going to be walking in procession behind the Queen's coffin. That'll be, I think, particularly heart-wrenching on a way that nobody really is going to be able to understand or empathise. The worst thing about that is that they will know that they're going to have to do it again, when sadly their father, his time comes. And that, I think, is a rather twisted, rather nasty, but not very nice thing at all to think about. That you've had to go through it as a boy, you're going through it now as man, and it'll come again before you yourself, in the case of Prince William, ascend to the throne. And I can't really sort of begin to imagine what that must feel like, to know that you're going to have to do that in front of the whole world, repeating it over and over again. What a dreadful thought that must be.
And that moves us to the Metro, who talking about that very procession, William and Harry, to walk together. It's never going to be an easy thing, but obviously it's going to bring back so many memories for them, isn't it, Jessica?
Yeah, and I was quite young when Princess Diana died, but that's the sort of moment that I remember, even as, quite a young child, seeing her, seeing those two boys, walking behind, their mother's funeral car, and it's of course that's what it's going to evoke for the public, seeing them together and knowing the kind of tragedy of the way that the brothers' relationship has disintegrated, which they seem to now be. It's hopefully this is a moment for them to try and heal that. They walked, they walked out together to greet people a few days earlier, and they seem to be incredibly determined to put on a united front as much as that's possible. And I think that we'll, seeing it cast in a new light is an important. I think it'll be an important moment for people. But obviously, as Benedict was saying, almost torturous for the people who have to do it.
Yeah, but positive story in the sense that there seems to be reconciliation, and that they are together as siblings and wanting to be together. We read that the Prince of Wales extended the olive branch and wanted to make peace.
And one hopes so too, because there's nothing actually worse when it comes to a sort of big family reunion, be it a wedding or a funeral, whatever it is, and old wounds get opened up. Again, especially given that this is being played out to the rest of the world, it was a little bit unsavoury, I thought, the way that there's almost been this sort of anticipation, what will happen with Meghan and Harry and the rest of the family, and you just sort of think, if there was one time, I mean, I don't ever think particularly it's a good moment to sort of rake that over the coals slightly, but actually, if there was one moment you shouldn't be thinking about those things, bringing this up, it's an event like this, actually, where there are far more important things going on. So if there has been a reconciliation, even if there hasn't, I think the important thing is that they're acting together as a family, and what goes on behind closed doors, I think I think is for them. And this period of all periods should not be a time for certain media organisations, members of the public, to speculate on what might be going on. That's not for us at this point.
Jessica, do you think some elements of the media have been mischief-making? Because some of the commentary was saying that when they did go on walkabout, the couples were separated, there was distance between them. Do you think that that's really not the sort of story that should be discussed at this time, as Benedict is suggesting?
I mean, look, I think we live in a free country and we've got a free press, and people are able to form their own views about what they see. I'd be lying if I didn't find generally some of the coverage about both sides to be distasteful over the course of the reporting of the rows, but I think we live in an age where every single instance of body language captured on camera is kind of reviewed on TikTok a million times over with captions added to it, and it's these mostly are generated by members of the public rather than the media. If anything, often the media kind of latches on to what people online are saying. So I think that was probably quite inevitable, and of course there is a kind of fascination, I think, particularly with Meghan, and sometimes an unfair one. But I think by and large, there has been a real effort, no matter whether there really has been any kind of reconciliation behind closed doors, to show a united front and to do the duty that they have to their grandmother.
Okay, let's move away from the Queen's upcoming funeral, and let's have a look at the Financial Times. Their story there: companies won't get energy benefits as soon as the public. That's the prediction there, Benedict.
I think this is down to the fact that this will require legislation, that there isn't actually a system in place for businesses as there is for households with the energy cap, and I think that that's why it's going to take a little bit longer. And of course, the problem is that with events like this and a lot of things shutting down, and also party conference season about to happen, there is a question as to when it is that actually the legislation could be put before Parliament and subsequently passed. And I think that there is probably a good argument at this point, given the extraordinary circumstances, for canning party conference season. I'm sure that won't go down particularly well with the parties themselves, but you have to be thinking about the best interests of the nation. It's all very well trying to put in place energy caps for households if we're all going to come out of this in 6 months' time and there's hardly going to be an economy left because lots of businesses have folded. Nothing even to do with heat or anything like that. They just can't afford to pay for the energy that they need. So this is the other thing to remember. This isn't just about businesses. It's things like charities. I think it actually affects things like schools as well. You might want to correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's public services as well. So we've all been talking, haven't we, about XYZ many people won't be able to heat their houses this winter, and you're kind of thinking, well, people might not be able to go into work after winter unless this is sort of nipped in the bud. And I feel a little bit more animated about this because this is a very serious emergency. If it comes to pass, the situation that is being predicted by many, it is going to be catastrophic for very many businesses in this country. And that'll lead to just elongating the pain out over the course of the rest of this Parliament, which, if you're Liz Truss, you don't have that much time left before we get to the general election cycle. And then you really are staring down the barrel.
So can the party conferences and get on with the business at hand?
I think that there's a good argument for party conferences going ahead and a good argument for Parliament to sit while they happen. That happened in 2019 during the height of the Brexit crisis. There's no need for all MPs to be at party conferences. They can spend a day or so there if they want, and for Parliament to sit during that part of it. And I think that would be a reasonable solution to the crisis, and the crisis that we face, and it's not unprecedented for that to happen. And indeed, I think it's likely that some form of that probably will happen, or at least that conference recess will be curtailed in some way. I mean, I think when it comes to the energy package for businesses, the blunt truth is it's just not ready. I mean, and that was obvious on Thursday when it was presented to us that all they could talk about, really, all the Treasury could talk about was an equivalent package for business, which didn't sound like a fully formed plan. So I think that it's just going to take some time to develop how you make a similar kind of offer from households to businesses.
Yes, lacking on detail, I think, is how you describe that. We've just got time for The Guardian very quickly, and this is the story to do with junk food rules could be scrapped under Liz Truss.
I mean, this is proper Liz Truss stuff. Everybody's talking about how she's a darling of the free market think tank circle, and this is the sort of thing that they talk about for a long time. Is the intervening, the nanny state, all this, that, and the other. The idea, of course, behind this, that things like the ban on adverts, having sweets at the checkout, buy one get one free offers, all of these things could be scrapped because it's about trying to reduce the pressures on business. And I think that there is actually an argument about that. In the short term, you want to get business, you want to give them every advantage that they can. But we do need to be honest about this. This does mean that it's a trade-off. It's about long-term health of the nation. I think probably in the circumstances, Liz Truss would say, look, I don't have time to be thinking about people's obesity 20, 30 years down the line. This is about personal responsibility, and right now I have responsibility to businesses.
Benedict and Jessica, thank you so much for the moment. See you in the next hour.